What would be best for you, a camcorder or a DSLR? Hi, I've just been lucky enough to get my hands on a Canon M50 and I've been trying it out recently. In fact, I've got a video that's just coming out soon that was made on this, and I made one error and I'm regretting that really, but I'm putting the video out because the information is okay. But I'm learning all the time about these cameras and how they are really different from these cameras. There's quite some differences in the way that they work. So I'm going to be looking at what are the differences that I've noticed myself since going over to this one from this one. In actual fact, not this one, but the one I'm using at the moment, which is the AX53. This is the CX625. But the AX53 that I'm using now is in a similar price bracket as this one. So they've got similar things going on inside, but I have noticed some significant differences. The first big difference I've noticed with the camcorders is the convenience factor. With these things, you can literally just pull out the screen and it's going to be ready to go ever so quickly. So that's already booted up and ready to go. And the picture is normally pretty good from these things. They are designed to be used quite quickly. I'm using the CX625 as an example, but the AX53 is slightly different in that it has got the touch screen to access everything, but it's also got a viewfinder which you pull out and pull up and you can look into. Now that is useful because basically when it's sunny and things like that, these screens can be quite difficult to use. The AX53 can be turned up so that it's brighter, so that does help to some extent. But if you're really pushed and you can't see it too well, then you just pull out that viewfinder and look straight into it like a camera. And that's the other thing. The thing with this camera is it has got its viewfinder here, the screen, the touch screen, but it also has, of course, the viewing thing here. But this viewfinder I've found isn't quite as good as the viewfinder on the AX53. This isn't quite as sharp. I've played around with the diopter, pushed it backwards and forwards to try and find the focus point. And I think if you're trying to judge things like sharpness, I think this isn't actually very good. You're better to judge sharpness on the screen itself. Another big difference, and this is one that really did my video that I'm about to release, was the fact that these things, the camcorders, the Sonys at least, they don't have any form of ISO control, but they do have a very wide lens. These lenses, I think, go down to about f2, something like that. This lens doesn't. It goes down to 3.5, and that's when the barrel is pulled right back, the zoom is right back. As soon as you start zooming in, the aperture starts to close down. So in low light, this is nothing like as good, really, as a camcorder. I think these are built to make films, and they're built to cope with really different light conditions very well. These rely much more heavily on the lens, and unfortunately, the standard lens that comes with the Canon isn't that open, and its widest is 3.5. As soon as you start using the zoom lens, the aperture starts to close down, so you're losing a lot of light. And I found that to my cost, because what I did, I'm so used to these having auto ISO, you don't have to worry about that with these. You just use it and that's it, it's fine. This, when I put it on auto ISO, because the lens was probably about f4, maybe a bit higher when I was using it because my lights weren't particularly bright, what happened was the ISO must have jumped up to a level that was quite spotty and nasty looking, and I noticed that straight away when I was looking at my footage on the computer afterwards. I noticed that it wasn't quite as focused as I would like, and the grain was quite an issue. So if you're going to get a Canon M50 with a standard lens, you've got to get very, very good lights, bright lights. But all too late after making the video, I found on this, there is a button on the top where you can access the ISO automatically, and it comes up and you can switch it to whatever you want. So what I would suggest is don't use auto ISO on this, because if you've got low light, it's instantly going to whap up the ISO and you're going to get awful grainy footage. So you have to force it to go to 100, 200, 400, whatever you want to use, but only use the one that you need. Don't go any higher, because as soon as you get to about 1600, 800, 1600, I think this doesn't cope very well. Another big difference I found is the way that white balance is done. With all of the Sonys, what you actually do is you just open up, go into your menu system, and you get into there and you look at something white or something grey, and you just set it on the screen. With the Canon, it's quite different, because what you've got to do, you're in movie mode, So you have to set it to picture mode. You have to take a picture, a photograph of something white or grey, and then use that to make up your white balance. So you have to then go into your movie mode and then set up your white balance there again in the menu. So this is kind of longer. It takes a little bit longer to set up than the Sonys. Again, I think the Sonys are just so well designed for movies, these camcorders. They're so well designed. I think because this is more like a camera that's designed for shooting photos, perhaps it's a little bit different, and that's what I'm finding. But you have to switch your camera into photographic mode, take a white balance picture, and then when you've taken the picture, switch it back or whatever, or go into the menu and set up the white balance, and then choose your mode again, back to the movie mode. And I find that a little bit strange because I'm so used to the Sonys. Something that I really miss on the Canon compared to the Sonys as well is that the AX53, the one I'm using now, has zebras, so you can always tell if you're blowing the picture out anywhere, and you can make choices as to what you want to blow out because you can see it on the screen. You don't get that with the Canon. With the M50, you have to use the histogram and watch that very closely. And again, that's not quite as convenient as the Sonys. Having said that, because it's easier to blow out, it had me looking very, very quickly at the picture profiles that are available in the Canon, and these are actually much better than the Sony. In the Sony, you have two profiles, the standard profile and a cine-tone type of thing. I don't like the cine-tone, I tend to use the standard, but in here there are quite a few profiles. They vary in intensity with the colours and the contrast, but also you can change them to suit yourself, to what you're filming. So for instance, if the contrast is a bit high, you can lower the profile's contrast, and you can lower the colour ranges as well. So that does help to an extent, and if that doesn't help, then of course you can download profiles from a Canon site or other sites where you put the thing into the camera via your computer, and it really does push down the contrast range. So I've got two contrast ranges on this one now that are really very, very good. The picture I get is very flat looking, almost like a log. This doesn't use Canon log at all. But the more expensive cameras do. This one doesn't, but I have got two profiles that are really, really flat. One of them is amazingly flat and almost looks like a log gamma, and that actually does cope with contrast extremely well. So this has a better control of contrast range, but I do wish it had zebras. Another thing about the Canon is it's got this video limit of 30 minutes. Once you get to 30 minutes, it'll stop. You can't do any longer. The Sonys will go on for as long as you want. I guess most people wouldn't find that much of a problem because most people don't take 30-minute videos or 30-minute clips. But if you're filming something like a show, very often what you would do is you might set up one camera to take the full show from way back at the back of the auditorium to take in the whole stage, and that would be running for the whole show. So you'd need it to be running for about an hour and a half, and you then join it with the footage that you take with the other cameras. So in that respect, this couldn't be used because it would stop after half an hour. So these things go on forever. The other thing is, I think this gets a little bit hotter. These seem to run forever, but I think this gets quite warm. Also, the battery life on these is quite a bit more than this. I have no idea why that would be, but I think the battery life on this is quite short. Once you get up into 4K, it's even shorter, but that's another issue. I think the batteries can be a bit of a problem, and especially as the compartment again is on the bottom, and if you've got a tripod there, this compartment can be hampered by the tripod, so you've got to take it off the tripod to change the battery, which I think is a nuisance, especially as you haven't got a massive battery life. Whereas with these, the battery's on the back and you can just whap them off, and there's no problem. You just basically put it there and then the battery comes away. This is only a small battery, but you can also get much larger batteries, and they give a fantastic battery life. If I stick a camera up on a big battery, if I wanted to film, say, a show, it will run for 2 hours easily, and it'll take the whole show in. So far, I think it probably looks that I'm quite anti-DSLRs and I'm more pro for the camcorder, but actually there are differences with this that I think this won't do. With this, I think there are far more controls. So the big question is how do you choose between a camcorder and a DSLR? I would say that this is more versatile. This is far more versatile. I would suggest, though, actually not getting the lens, I would suggest getting a prime lens rather than taking this 15-45 lens that comes standard with this camera. It's not the greatest of lenses. It's a little bit too slow for me. I would need something that goes down to 1.8, f1.8, especially if you wanted to do, say, theatre work, stuff like that, where you've got low lights. This wouldn't do it for me. It's handy to have the zoom on it, which is pretty good. It's a pretty good zoom, but the problem is the speed of the lens for me is just not very good. I would prefer a better lens, and the problem is that you're going to pay as much for the lens as you do for the camera, and it's quite expensive to do that. This will become quite an expensive camera if I've, for instance, got something that was a fast lens. I think fast lenses are coming out like £200-300, so we're looking at almost doubling the price of the camera with another lens. But there are more controls with this. I love the fact that you can get the white balance correct, and you can tweak it with there's a little thing on this to tweak the white balance very slightly in any direction you like. So if you look at the screen, which actually is very accurate, I find the LCD screen on the back is way more accurate than the viewfinder. If you look at it and you look at real life and you look at the screen, you can literally sit there and dial in the color you want. It's got a lot of control there. You've got to be careful with the ISO, especially with this lens. So it pays to check the ISO and learn that button on the top that goes straight to your ISO control. That's the button that really does help control what's going on, as you'll see in my video that's just coming out. I think this is an excellent camera. It requires some setting up, but once you set it up, it's absolutely brilliant, and the quality that you can get from this is staggering. Having said that, with all the controls that you've got on this, it's easier to go wrong, and that's the biggest difference between a camcorder and a DSLR. The camcorder perhaps has less control, and it takes control of what you're doing more than this does. This allows you to go wrong, and that's the end of it. This doesn't allow you really to go wrong, and that's what I like about camcorders, especially if you're out and about shooting things where you don't want to worry about the picture. This is absolutely superb. But this is probably better as long as you take the time to set it up before you take the shot. So it's a sort of swings and roundabouts thing. So which is best? It depends on what you're shooting. Personally, if I was going out filming my family and doing odd shots around the place, I think I would use a camcorder more happily than I would a DSLR. But if I wanted something that really looked top notch, I'd take the time to set this up, and I think I'd take this. It's a difficult choice, and it depends on what you're going to do with it. It's very, very difficult, and I can't give an answer. I think neither wins. The semi-automatic, the semi-manual, semi-automatic aspect of these is a lifesaver in most situations when you're in a hurry. The manual aspect of this is terrific if you want really, really high quality video. Swings and roundabouts. So I'd leave the choice to you. What would you do? Hope this was useful to you, and I hope to see you next time. Cheers for now.